Communications expert Marshall McLuhan once suggested that the medium is the message. And we're going to argue that in a world where attention spans are limited and incredibly short, where charities choose to use social media as their medium, their message necessarily becomes tainted and necessarily becomes problematic to the end they're trying to achieve. One very simple clarification before we move to opening government's constructive material. We don't think this debate is necessarily a policy debate because it's quite feasible to suggest a world where we completely shut down social media worldwide. Rather, we're happy to evaluate the presence of social media as an available option in the toolkit of options available for charities. And we're going to ask whether charities as a whole, whether they be World Vision or whether they be the ALS, whether they should use social media or not. And the answer for opening government is going to be a loud and clear no. We're going to make 4 arguments in this regard. As the first speaker, I'm going to talk about how this actually hurts charities in a financial perspective. I'm then going to talk about how this reduces them to a carnival of gimmicks. And then I'm finally going to talk about how social media creates a downward spiral to the bottom. While my charming colleague and possibly clone, Josh H., is going to talk about how this devalues the spirit of altruism. Some quick definitions that get out of the way. I think charities are fairly standard. These are pro-social organizations that are interested in achieving community welfare goals. And by social media, we're referring to standard tactics like Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook. Technology that basically decentralizes knowledge and places it in the hands of people. Argument number 1, that it hurts people financially. Now, we know that the opening opposition, and generally the opposition bench is going to argue a counterfactual. They're going to say that social media campaigns allow us to get money and awareness where we otherwise wouldn't have gotten. And we're going to argue that our metric has to be broader than this alone. We believe it's important to consider the largest perspective because charities don't just exist for the 6 months in which they're popular on Twitter, they exist for decades. And we're going to argue that social media creates a very short attention span that has a track record of failure in terms of creating longevity across the board. There's 2 reasons for this. The first one is that it creates such an intense burst of financial interest that after the few months in which it's popular, people genuinely become fatigued with the process. So even if they had the money, they feel they've already committed so much to it, and their friends, by virtue of them talking about it on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, have also contributed so much to it that they're less willing to give it. This correspondingly creates a second problem. Information becomes weak. There is no genuine retention rate. And this is backed up by social media experts and communication consultants all across the world. They know about it for 6 months, but beyond that, they don't ask more because they think they already know enough. That's why, for instance, the Coney 2012 movement ultimately didn't last beyond the initial burst of social fanaticism about how we should be more democratic and encourage human rights. That's why the Live Strong movement, ladies and gentlemen, didn't last long past Lance Armstrong's own problems in terms of his off-track conduct. And that's why we're going to argue there is a clear-cut track record of failure. Although, for the 6 to 8 months in which they exist, they would have gotten an unprecedented amount of money, and it's probably fair to say that without social media, they never would have gotten it. The problem is, past those 6 to 8 months, they never recover again. And the problem here is financial and mental fatigue. No, thank you, sir. People feel they've given so much and people feel they know so much, so there's no need to give beyond that. We argue this is problematic because charities aren't just about the 8 months in which everybody's pouring cold ice water over themselves, right? The cause for Lou Gehrig's disease is a lifelong cause because diseases don't happen overnight, which means that we don't just need like $10 billion, even if it's an unprecedented amount in 6 months. We need it for decades because scientific research is piecemeal and often relies on trial and error. Thank you, sir. In this regard, we're going to suggest that there are plenty of alternatives that social media, that instead of social media, that charities should use. We're going to posit that charities should build long, sustainable relationships rather than intense flirtation with popular pressure. For instance, World Vision builds relationships by using charity events that encourage you to get to know the people you're giving, right? Every time you give money, you are receiving letters from the child in Africa, for instance, over a period of 10 years. They write to you, you get to learn about them, you potentially even get to meet them. We're going to suggest that this is better because rather than a burst of money or a burst of knowledge, you build affinity and you own that affinity. It's not told to you by virtue of the number of retweets on someone else's Twitter, it's told to you by the picture of the child and the heartfelt message he's writing to you. We argue this is sustainable, we argue this is long-term, and that's why even today, World Vision has gone through the difficult financial difficulties, no thank you sir, faced by Western democracy, and continues to still be one of the largest, most well-funded charities. The burst of money is unprecedented. They wouldn't have gotten it without social media. It only lasts for 6 months. We suggest charities need more than that. Now we know they're going to say, you know what, it's not mutually exclusive. First and foremost, it's mutually exclusive insofar as social media taints that message. I'm going to talk about that in my second argument. But it's also mutually exclusive from a financial point of view, because charities can only spend so much in creating viral campaigns, and likewise, the donors they're asking money for only have so much money to give. And that's why when there is fatigue, beyond past Coney, beyond past this strong, you start to look to other charities. So you may get unprecedented attention, but it unfortunately doesn't last long. Second argument, it is often reduced to a carnival of gimmicks. The problem with social media is that it's decentralized, which means that charities don't have ownership over the material. Typically, this ownership is decentralized and given to people who start to retweet it and start to pour buckets of ice water over themselves in different fashions. This may not necessarily be a bad thing because it creates ownership, and they're going to suggest that people are going to find out more. The problem is, when it's so decentralized, it's also easier to taint. Scandals, for instance, relating to individuals who misuse it on social media, who instead put naked pictures of themselves pouring buckets of ice water over themselves, or say the misconduct of CEOs, such as the 20-year-old who led the Coney campaign, means that the altruistic message of the charity becomes devolved into a carnival of gimmicks. People remember it for the misconduct of people on social media campaigns rather than the genuine message, and they don't genuinely try to find out more. In vast majority of instances, 90% of people retweet the video, maybe tokenistically click on the link, but statistics show that they don't genuinely have a hit rate to find out more about the information. We argue this taints the movement, but the final reason why this is terrible is because this encourages a downward spiral to the bottom. In a world where charities are about sensationalistic viral media, it's a case of fastest finger first. Who is the first charity to find out the most sensationalistic way to gain attention? We say this is problematic because individuals are denied the ability to have a reasoned discussion as to which charity genuinely deserves their help. Let's face it, our pockets are limited, and people should have the ability to rationally discuss with one another whether certain charities are worth more money than other charities. We argue that this discussion gets hijacked by the presence of social media. First, because it's decentralized, but second, because it's taken charge by people who are more interested in the social gimmicks rather than the pragmatic economics of the policy. Even if there are some who are interested, they tend to be the vast minority of instances, and the compelling track record of failure shows this. We think charities should live long and they should be sustainable, but this comes from building meaningful and profound relationships rather than short bursts of adrenal flirtation.
Thank the speaker for his speech. To open the case for the opposition, I call the leader of opposition, Sher May.
Josh, the message is a clear cry for help. We think this cry was not heard before the use of viral campaigns. It's being heard now, and despite several problems with it, it's still the better scenario than one where people continue to live in apathy and ignore the problem. I want to talk about a few things. First, I want to talk about the characteristics of a viral challenge. Second, I'm going to tell you why this is good thematically as a gateway to further exploration. I'm going to deal with some of the rebuttal responses to be integrated. And finally, why this builds a stronger sense of community that empowers individuals fighting their circumstance. First of all, I want you to understand two characteristics of the viral challenge. One, it is immensely popular as compared to other charitable movements. This means it has a wider reach and scope geographically and across different people from different backgrounds. Second, there is an immense attraction to things which are viral. So while charities appeal to you on a rational level, this adds an additional level of appeal. That joining this is part of a broader movement that there's something good, that's popular, but you get moral satisfaction from doing so. These are the two key distinguishing factors that tip the balance of this debate away from government. Alright, first level of argumentation. Why is this a good thing? First of all, it's a gateway that didn't exist before this. Josh was very negligent with the comparative. He said, oh, we're going to have like rational charities, we're going to go out there and do lots of things. But the problem that most charities are affected by is one of apathy, not bothering to find out what this information, get this information, or to find out what the types of causes that are out there. So on the very first level, we think this increases the amount of money, this increases the amount of donations, this increases awareness and knowledge. Now, opening government's arguments to this were beautiful. They say this hurts charity in the long run. No, this is not true. Once you get access and once you're put on the map for many people around the world, This is an opportunity for charities to show that they are reliable charities in the long run. How do they do so? By telling people where the money has gone to, by being more accountable to the very people who are giving them money in the first place, so that they can continue to help the people, no thank you, that they care about. Second, he told us, people become fatigued because information is weak. Again, what's the comparative exactly? Because information is weak in the status quo anyway. You haven't shown us why it becomes any stronger on your side of the house. At worst, our side doesn't make it worse by having a full toolkit of measures where charities can use a combination of both deep-seated engagements like writing letters in conjunction with viral methods to appeal to the full range of the population. Because let's face it, different people donate for different reasons. We think having more options is always a good thing. So, no thank you. Next of all, with regards to issues like Pony, we say, yes, maybe concern goes away from the specific issue, but concern broadens in society when it becomes more morally conscious. It means that rather than caring only about the cause, you then care about the geographical region, or the types of issues, the general group of people who are affected. And in that process, you become more discerning, no thank you, as to which charities you do choose to vote for. You do choose to donate money to, I'm sorry. As a result, this means that from the perspective of one single charity, John is absolutely right. But we think that's an incredibly selfish perspective. And we say for the good of society as a whole, for charities as a whole, it's a good thing if they try to use viral campaigns for the good of all. The next tier under why this is a good gateway is because it creates more spin-offs in the other charities, so thank you. Plenty of people who have used the Ice Bucket Challenge have said, either I don't want to donate money to the ALS cause, although I believe the metric or this method is a good one, and use that opportunity to justify why those other causes are better. We think this creates precisely the discourse that George was looking for. Only when many people are engaged in their day-to-day lives, when you open the Facebook newsfeed and you see a discussion, for instance, like people ranging from Nisha Wu to check his newsfeed, like an ordinary person in my class, no thank you. When everyone can engage in this discussion, in a public forum, these discussions don't just happen in your mind. You get to find out what other people think. You get to hear their claims and their justifications for why some charities are good and why some aren't. So the spin-offs and the starting of discourse on what charities are the good charities, what charities use their money well, is something that would not have happened if we did not take this general discussion of charities and move it onto a level of social network. So this is really important because then you can now have discussions over the urgency of causes as much as our moral priorities and whether these issues are truly so important. So this is compared to a lack of outreach on the key government side that would not have happened. So that also deals with Josh's argument on why the discussion is hijacked. It isn't. What he did try to add on to this was to say there are gimmicks and misconduct that kind of screw the discussion up because you have naked people pouring water over themselves. Okay, what happened in response? Everyone said this is a bastardization of the people we're trying to protect. There was moral outrage. We said this is not what charities are for. Focus on the cause at hand. And that rallying cry was really important, both to the people themselves, which I'll talk about in a bit, but also because it reaffirms our moral compulsions and our convictions. It shows precisely in this way that the society we are creating as a result of this stance, this world, is one that is morally able to justify its actions. This is a good way for society to move forward. So those trivial things are in the periphery. Outside doesn't have to defend them. Their presence only empowers those who truly care for charities. So the first point has been summed up. The good in this debate is increasing awareness and a gateway, and I'll take you in a moment, that leads to awareness, more information, and a better discussion at hand. Yes?
Don't you think charities will lose focus if they are focused on trying to compete with viral social media campaigns from other charities?
Okay, let's be frank, right? Charities compete on either side of the house. They compete by using graphic images, they compete by using information. We think this is no worse on our side, and if anything, it's like just one additional avenue for them to then showcase or access. And my next speaker is going to tell you why this helps new charities in geographically far-flung areas put themselves on the map at a very low entry cost. Discount that, okay? All right, second argument, community. What's the problem lots of individuals face? And let's be clear, it's not just about ALS sufferers, even though we think they're really important. They face the problem of feeling alone. When you are ill, in a hospital fighting the disease with no one else but the nurse there, it feels like you're fighting on your own. When you're in the streets of New York, the Bronx, trying to fight poverty as a black kid, it feels like you are on your own. When you are a farmer trying to get vaccinations for your village, in the fields of Ethiopia, for instance, with only the UN aid worker there, it feels like you are alone, or at least like really isolated in this broader struggle. The power of social networking, especially when internet penetration is increasing in many places around the world. This argument definitely applies in developed countries, and to a large extent in developing countries that are somewhat developed and have high internet penetration rates, is that it creates a network of individuals who you can visibly and viscerally see are standing by you. They can't fight beside you, they can't fight the disease or the illness or poverty for you, But the very fact that they're committed to share this message, to pass it on to their friends, and visibly and vocally say, I stand with you on a spiritual and moral level, is incredibly empowering. It tells people that they're not alone in this fight, that they can aspire to more. And arguably, it's sometimes more important than giving them financial resources. It gives them the will to believe they can use these resources that we have given them to break free from their circumstances. And we believe that is the most important gift that any society can give to someone in need of help. For all of these reasons, we think viral movements have done fantastic things for charities. We're very proud to stand in opposition.
Thank the speaker for his speech. To further the case for the government bench, I call the Deputy Prime Minister here.
Sensationalist rhetoric created by OO displaces all the form of reasonable discourse that we think is so essential in sustaining these long-term movements. I'm going to talk to you about one extension for the House today, and it will be divided into several tips. So the extension that it devalues the spirit of altruism by creating a very coercive culture where people are co-opted into doing things they may not otherwise have done. But before that, a few rebuttals for the House. So what Tech said was that, well, it creates gateways that actually didn't exist. And also it's very clear we stand by all the other forms of means that can create this, right? We're okay with charities televising their cause, giving very poignant images that speaks out to the audiences in very emotive ways. We're okay with things like going to schools and using this as a platform to air its perspectives, as very prominent charities like World Vision have done to showcase their cause in society, and it's been very effective. We don't think that there's took down a significant portion of the case on World Vision. But secondly, we think that the vast amounts of people are the vast minority of people are predisposed into donating, right? That's fine. But we're talking about the vast majority of people who have immense fatigue, right? The wave of fanaticism cannot last the amount of the attention spans any longer. So on our side, whereby we allow them to build very profound relationships with people, like in World Vision, whereby people write to their pen pals in another region, they're able to understand their situation, understand their stories in a very different way. The people on their side, right, would be the ones who are just catching onto the wave of social media and social phenomenon. They may not necessarily understand these things. So we don't think is exactly right. We think that personal humanity is far better than the big social media stardom that their side creates. Secondly, they told us that, well, if people are actually okay with doing these things, they'll be concerned with other areas as well, right? They're concerned with the massive geographical region. Firstly, apart from the idea of fatigue. Secondly, we think there's a very, very big difference because it's very easy for someone to put an ice bucket on their head, right? But it's very difficult to say, I'm going to be concerned about various other regions. I'm going to have a mission trip and go there and give out various forms of handouts to those people. There's a very huge opportunity cost for these people. It's very difficult for their side to broker. Comparatively, on our side, it's far more easier. Why? Because when they're able to build very profound relationships, we think it creates a stronger capacity in them to actually want to do these things than just resort to a sense of stardom. So comparatively, we think that their side, outside, you have people that are far more interested in going to those places and finding and helping them to a far more regard, right? Thirdly, they told us that, well, actually Facebook acts as a platform to stir discussion, social media platforms reaches out to much more people as well. Firstly, we tell you that the amount of sensationalist rhetoric that comes about from these charity campaigns, for instance, is equivalent to that of talking who are the hottest stars. It's equivalent to talking about things what is the most popular thing in pop culture, for instance. The problem with their side is that people equate very sensationalist rhetoric of these social media campaigns with everything else in the world that's equally sensationalist as well. So in their world, we have huge amounts of people that don't understand the difference between valuable causes and things which are popular in pop culture. So they don't understand this distinction on their side. Everything is the very same level as other forms of sensationalist points. Fourthly, they told us on how more outreach should be you said that more outreach was created with people who were naked, participated in the ice bucket challenge. Firstly, there was a point they never really rebutted that charities don't have any ability in controlling how the evolution of these movements, right? We're telling you that there isn't really much of a synthesis within these kinds of groups and saying there is a cause, therefore I must help them. So the vast amounts of moral outrage, as much as it's concern in the minority, the vast majority of people who actually are naked and carry out the ice bucket challenge are just catching on to the sensationalist wave. There isn't a synthesis between them wanting to be popular as opposed to trying to help and trying to continue and progress their cause. The cause is built on the idea of community. They said, well, it makes you feel like you're part of a bigger community. And our first response is there really going to be altruistic? Why do you need to be part of a bigger community, right? And the only thing is, there's another important perspective that people do things not expecting other people to know about it. These are equally good acts that are morally praiseworthy as well. You don't need to be part of a bigger community to achieve this. But before I move on, yes?
Either your side uses rational information like data, which doesn't appeal to anyone, or you use things like graphic images or celebrity endorsements, which are equally exploitative.
Firstly, we think that, on the very first level, we think that people who react to these social media campaigns don't do it on a very rational level. Why? Give you an example like NUS Ice Bucket Challenge, for instance, right? After the challenge was initiated, a lot of people were commenting and checking out the annual reports and finding out that actually the money isn't actually spent where it should. So after that, people started realizing that maybe this cause is not the best cause that I should support. So under your word, a lot of people aren't rational actors in this regard. But moving on, I'm going to talk to you about my extension, how it devalues the spirit of altruism, because it's coercive, right? We think the act of donating is only necessarily morally praiseworthy insofar as the motives of doing so is genuine. We think it's very important for people not to do so because it's a social phenomenon, as opposed to them understanding the cause and their heart reaches out to help, like the starving African children who they would love to help. Social media campaigns are extremely coercive, right? Because it tends to play a very basic aspect of human nature that we like to be the in-group, right? No one wants to be to be an outcast, and no one likes doing things that other people are not doing. So at the point on their world, when people like some leaders of government, for instance, their friends, families, brothers and sisters, start participating in these actions, it creates a wave of coercion that forces other people who may not have wanted to do these things from actually doing so. But why are their reservations equally valuable in this regard? No thank you. These reservations are things like questions over how the organization used the cash, right? Like we told you, AOS has huge problems with how it distributes the cash. And many online users started realizing that there was a problem. But hold on, everyone had donated already, right? So we think that there are huge questions and these are very valuable reservations as well. But secondly, it cheapens the cost as well because people realize this is a wave of fanaticism that I don't want to be part of. I don't want to participate and feel. So you force them to do so as well. But let's look at what happens to people who say, I'm just going to do it. It cheapens altruism at the point people start using this as a means saying, I'm actually helping poor people, therefore I'm generous. So in other words, they also start putting ice buckets in their heads and saying, I'm actually a very kind-hearted person, when you may not actually do so. The opportunity cost of putting an ice bucket in your head is significantly low, right? We think many people can do it, but taking out the mental and going to those places that need help, that's what many people on the outside would not want to do at all. So it allows people to say, I'm generous because I did it, when it wasn't actually altruism. Secondly, it coerces people into participating in movements that you don't want to do, even though there are valid reservations. And finally, because building profound relationships is extremely crucial in lasting the movement and progressing it forward, we are so happy to send it OG.
Then a speaker for his speech to further the case for the opposition, and the opening half I call the deputy leader of opposition. Here.
Now the broad problem with opening government's case is that they gave us a lot of lofty ideals about how people should be forced and how people should be willingly help other people. But they never once told us exactly how they're going to do this, how they're going to get people on board, and how they're going to get money to those who need it. I have two broad questions. First, do we help raise money for those in need? And second, do we help charities in other important ways as well? And here I'm going to deal directly with their argument about the spirit of altruism. So first, on the idea of whether we raise money at all. Now my first speaker already gave you a number of reasons why essentially our side helps to raise a huge amount of money. The response, and I quote them here, is that there's a majority of people with immense fatigue. First of all, this is false on a factual level. It is in no way a majority of the people, as we saw in the ALS Ice Bucket Challenge. But second of all, we tell you that the alternative is that they don't even know about the challenge in the first place. And here's where we tell you that at the very least, outside is able to spark some interest in this challenge, and essentially, outside is better able to get people on board to donate money to these challenges as well. But second of all, the problem with this argument is that it relies on the premise that there is in some way limited financial capital amongst people. We disagree. We believe that people's pockets are not limited, and their ability to donate to causes is not in any way limited. They're not going to donate $1,000 and say, this is the end of my donation, end of my altruism for my entire life. We believe that the moment that we allow more causes to actually engage in activism, the more we allow causes to become persuasive and to engage people, that is when they can still gain money. There is no such thing as the fact that people are only going to donate in limited amount. But the second idea on whether or not we help people in other ways. But the only thing that they told us in response to this argument, don't think you matter, was that our side does not have a spirit of altruism. First of all, we argue that all of the methods that they propose are essentially not unique. Why? No thank you, sir. Because there's no distinction between the methods that we use and the methods that charities use all the time. For instance, graphic images. For instance, using celebrities to support their causes. Or even using things like mass media, such as, for instance, radio and television. We tell you that all of these are essentially the same things, and their side has not given us a sufficient reason for why these are distinct in any way. But furthermore, we tell you that their side then latched onto this catchphrase, and they don't do it because they are willing to do so. They are only persuaded to do so. First of all, we argue that the majority of society is about persuasion. In fact, in almost every election campaign, your essential purpose is to persuade other people to vote with you. This happens all the time, and there's nothing wrong with the fact that people are persuaded to do something. No, thank you, sir. Let me tell you that essentially, this happens all the time in the same way that on their side, you go to schools and workplaces to get the community element involved and to get the communities to persuade themselves on whether or not they should vote. No, thank you, sir. This is no different from, for instance, charities giving you a community chess card, as happens in schools, and the teacher telling you that your class should vote as they go. We tell you that all of these happens all the time. There is nothing wrong at all with people being persuaded to vote, with people being persuaded to give them money. No, thank you, sir. In fact, we tell you that furthermore, this argument suffers from a lack of a completion of the link on why we should judge actions based on their intentions and not their outcomes. We tell you that this argument already fails on the premise that essentially we still have moral outcomes that accrue from the fact that they still give money, that they still provide awareness for this cause, and they still ensure that finally the person with ALS still has more money to treat his illness. They have never once shown us why the intentions of people are in any way supersede the real and lasting impacts that accrue to those with ALS. But finally, my first speaker already gave you a number of arguments that their side completely dropped. First thing we told you, that they spark discourse, no thank you sir, about other things. For instance, people are arguing about whether or not ALS is the best thing we should vote, we should give money to, and whether or not things like malaria are other things that we should donate money to. Therefore, our side sparks interest on what are the best causes to donate to. But second of all, as I told you that we widen societal spheres of support for victims of these things. We told you how our side allows for these people not to feel as if they are abandoned anymore, already dropped on their side. Moving on to my substantive argument on how we tap on new methods to create unprecedented widespread outreach. I think Josh.
Yay! Okay. The decentralized Coney movement died in 8 months. The centralized, personalized World Vision movement stood the test of time. Maybe the first speaker in your team to suggest why the track record of failure is going to be substantially different.
So, first of all, we argue that we can use the method that World Vision uses all the time. If you're going to ask people to write letters to people, sure, these are not mutually exclusive to the methods that we use. In fact, my first speaker already gave you a convincing explanation for why maybe, for instance, the Coney movement has not seen much of a resurrection anymore, because the concerns broaden in their scope. It went to things such as, for instance, whether or not the region as a whole is doing well or not. We already gave you this analysis first, and we tell you that our side is in no way ensuring that they can't have long-term change. Moving on to a substantive argument on how we tap on new methods to create unprecedented outreach, especially for new movements geographically and for other areas that are far-flung. The thesis is that social campaigns are a welcome step towards becoming in tune with necessary methods of expanding outreach. I have 3 reasons why. First, because of low entry costs. We tell you that right now, all that needs to be done is to set up a Facebook page and provide information about the challenge and about the condition. This does not happen in their side, which essentially has to result in things such as, for instance, giving out flyers to people, having our people on a day job go out and give flyers to individuals rather than using a social media website or a page to ensure awareness about the challenge. But furthermore, we tell you that the second reason is because of the hopping effect of social media. The moment that you have one individual engaged and he brings along his friends to do a challenge, this also ensures that the reach of these social media is far more widespread, because that individual brings along his friends and his friends bring along their friends as well. Therefore, outside is best able to ensure that the hopping effect is best used to advantage to get more awareness for these challenges. But the final reason why outside is better is because we ensure a rapid response to situations that are in need of our help. On our side, we tell you that no charity should be disadvantaged just because it's a new charity. We tell you that no charity, no person should be forced to continue living in this condition when he knows that just because of the slow methods that their side uses, such as, for instance, handing out flyers and waiting for people to donate through postal services, or for instance, other prohibitively difficult methods of donation, we tell you that every single person should have the right to ensure that he gets money, and this happens through our side when we allow for people to donate money in a rapid and convenient method. And it is for these reasons I am so proud to stand in opening opposition.
Thank the speaker for his speech. To open the debate for the closing half, I call the member of government here.
themselves. Why? Because they are more likely than anyone else to overstretch themselves simply because they have the money. They try to do a lot of stuff. They have the intentions. They think they have the money, but they do not know that this sustainability do not last. Because the point of the hopping effect that they tend to mention to us is that when one of them goes away, as they will, because a new viral campaign would spread out, they would take their friends away too, and they would then take away their friends as well. And the second problem we see with this line of logic is that all it does is create awareness. Now, as I would later show you in one of my extensions, that all this does is to create a number of armchair critics who think that they have done so much for the world, for the goodness, for the new causes, but actually have accomplished nothing. Therefore, these new charities are not helped in the any ways, because first, they are lulled into a false sense of security about their established nature. No, sir. And secondly, because they do not realize that the value of a life is not the true value that they are looking for. Now, moving on to my extension, there are 4 extensions to our argument. Firstly, that viral campaigning increases the chances of corruption in these charities. Secondly, that it creates drought to other charities that also need and receive donations. Thirdly, as I mentioned in my rebuttals, that it creates armchair critics. And fourthly, that it makes because it is difficult for charities to come up with new viral campaigns over and over again, it puts an unfair burden on them that actually distracts them from the true purposes. Now, firstly, how it leads to corruption and misuse of the funds these people allot. On a first level, these charities know that they are collecting this money on a very short-term scale. This is their one of opportunity, and they want to take it if they want to misuse and corrupt these funds. But the second and the deeper problem is that they again and again to continue to keep donating to this cause. What a viral social campaign does is create supporters, one-time supporters, that are never anyway going to come back to your charity again and donate. And this loses the personal relationship in a moment, sir, as well as the notion to be accountable to your donor. Yes, sir.
Your burden is to show that this same group of people in your side of the house would have gone to find out about charities and stayed in the long run by building meaningful relationships. Can you be the first speaker on your bench to show us why this would happen?
Sure, sir. The fact that charities have existed before social media campaigns tell us that there are alternative means of establishing and collecting funds for them. So there's not a problem with that. There have been methods that can continue. We say that there's a new player in town and it's not a fair and a good player in town. Now moving on to my second extension is that it creates draw to other charities. Now unlike what they will have you believe, yes, the pockets of people are limited. At least the money that they want to give is limited to various causes. Now what you're doing through what you're achieving through viral social media campaigns, it is not an excess of donation that suddenly come out of nowhere. These people who react to these public messages are already altruistic in nature and seek to do their good deed of the year, their contribution to the society for this time. But why all you accomplish is a redistribution of funds from one charity to the other, who just happens to be more successful in social media campaigns. Now third, that this creates, thank you sir, this creates armchair critics. This works on two levels, one much more dangerous than the others. On the first level, it simply makes people believe that liking and sharing is actual volunteerism. We have to tell you it's not. The reasons are pretty obvious. You need groundwork. You do not need people who think that they have contributed while in insignificant ways they do not. And we have shown that this has been proven that while people react well to media campaigns, the donation rate has not changed much. And the second is the fact of celebrities and public figures, which are often in lead in such viral campaigns. Now we know that celebrities and public figures often conduct social work to get goodwill or to get a petrol check. However, by giving them this viral campaign, you provide them an easy way to show to people that they are doing volunteerism, when in fact they are not. And this creates a further problem because a lot of other people who follow these celebrity idols into charity and volunteer work currently believe that simple liking and sharing, simply pouring an ice water, bucket water, which is the catchy part of the campaign, is the main thing. It is the volunteerism. No, thank you, sir. And lastly, let me talk about how it is difficult to charities to come up with viral campaigns again and again. Now, here is a distinction that has not been made in this debate so far and needs to be made. There's a difference between popular and there's a difference to viral. Viral campaigns need to spread very quickly and they need to be very much more popular than any other competing campaigns that exist. That's what makes them viral. And now this tells us that as more and more charities realize that the only way to get money seems to be going viral these days, they all spend unnecessary amount of time and resources into developing viral campaigns. And as time goes on and as this saturates, you need to find more and more creative ways, more and more difficult ways, which will take more and more of your resources and time. And this creates a problem not only in the short term, but also in the long term, where the end point is that you will see all that charities do is trying to find what viral is and how can they do next. So what we have shown you is that the 4 reasons that social viral media is extremely bad for charities. Firstly, it creates armchair critics. Secondly, there's potential for misuse. Thirdly, it creates trolls in other charities. And fourth, it is difficult for charities to maintain this up. Therefore, I'm very proud to propose.
Thank the speaker for the speech. To open the case for closing opposition, I call the member of opposition. Here.
The debate so far
that the opening house had, and to a certain extent the closing house jumped into, is a debate between the massive short-term benefits that both sides agree exist from these viral marketing campaigns against maybe the loss of sustainability that a more slow, well-thought-out campaign could accrue. What we on side closing opposition are going to show you is how a viral marketing campaign can actually lead to sustainability within a regular campaign in and of itself. And that will be the extension that we bring to you. But before that, I want to deal with one point from the opening house and then kind of plough into the 4 extensions from the closing house. Let's firstly quickly talk about discourse from OG, because basically OO handled them on most of everything else. But the point about discourse is really this. This type of attention drives discourse because now people are aware of it, people are interested in it, people are wondering why are people pouring water all over themselves all over my Facebook newsfeed? It doesn't make sense. So that creates interest, that creates discourse, that gets people involved at the very least. But more to the point, when people actually take a step further and take action, albeit a largely symbolic action of dumping cold water over your head, for whatever reason, that creates investment in that same cause. And that means that there's now a bond between the person taking an action and the cause that they are taking up. And that's a bond that stays with them, Mr. Speaker, a bond that actually they can use later to call back upon. No, sit down. But I don't want to spend too much time upon this, otherwise it'll make OO look good. Let's instead look at the extensions coming up from closing government. The first is the idea of corruption. Corruption occurs when there's a lack of accountability between the people who are giving and the people who are receiving. We say first and foremost there are already laws in existence that will take care of corruption and all that, so we think it's a red herring in this debate. But secondly, if these are good charities that care about sustainability, like presumably from the talk of an opening government, that's what we're talking about. If they care about sustainability, they have an interest to make sure that they are accountable and that they are open and transparent. And on the third level, this intense burst of social media spotlight makes them accountable because all of a sudden they are under the spotlight and people are looking at them. So that drives the structures that will make them accountable in the long term. The second argument they brought is this idea of drought to other people. The fundamental question here is, to other causes, the fundamental question here is, were they going to give in the first place, or were they just going to not know that it existed? Because the limit of other campaigns, the limits of having people dress up in funny costumes and say, hey, give to SPCA, or throwing red paint on people and say, hey, you're bad because you're wearing fur, the limits of these is that they affect only the people there and then. What is different about viral marketing is the unprecedented reach that people can get. That's why this doesn't cause a drought to others. It's to use economics, you're expanding the market rather than playing a zero-sum game. No, thank you, sit down. The third idea is of armchair critics. This is premised on the fact that they don't do anything, Mr. Speaker, and in my extension, as part of sustainability, I'll show you that the impact that these so-called armchair critics have had. So I'll move on to that later. The final idea is this going to be a distraction from their fundamental cause? And we say fundamentally, charities are competing in a competitive environment, in a competitive industry where you're buying, giving to charity, so to speak. So it's not as though they aren't competing already. You see it on the streets where they come up with all these weird campaigns, or minute to win, I don't even know if that's a charity, whatever. But they come up with all these weird campaigns and things that you have to do on the street. Or they dress their volunteers up and put like cat's ears on them, and all these silly things without trying and spending a lot of money to try and do it. That is already distracting. More to the point, if you look at what is distracting in financial terms, things like TV ads during the Super Bowl or flashy brochures are going to be much more financially draining than a viral marketing campaign, which is in and of itself basically only online, very easy to set up and very easy to spread quickly. So you get big bang for your buck. So we don't think this is going to lead to a distraction or a financial loss from other causes. Before I move on to sustainability closing.
Ultimately, if charity becomes about popularity, this actually forces a charity to only consider their social image far above their actual contribution.
Charity is only about popularity. If you're unpopular as a charity, you don't achieve very much, do you? Right? Like if you rely on donations, you must be a popular charity. So again, we think that the fundamental premise of that question is wrong. Let's talk about sustainability. On the first level, I'd like to point out that it's not technically our obligation. They've tried to make it an opening government more about, hey, we have to look at this in the long term. No, we don't. We could just evaluate this on the short versus the long term. But we're going to take a step further on closing the proposition and look at why, in the long term, this actually does work in our favour. I'm going to do this on 2 levels. Firstly, I'm going to talk to you about individual charities, how this gives them the means to actually become sustainable. And secondly, I'm going to talk about the community as a whole, how this gives them the impetus and the encouragement to actually take part in charity in the future. Let's look at individual charity, because not every charity is World Vision. Not every charity has small, starving African children that they can put on brochures and people go, oh, that's nice. Some people are dealing with things like, well, not that's nice, but you know, some people are dealing with truly disgusting things, like, I don't know, genital warts, right? And I'm sure there's a charity out there for somewhere. You can probably ask, okay, Josh, later, he'll know. So the point is, right? The point is, I don't know. Not going to go there again, right? Where was I? No, maybe later. So when you've got things like dementia and cancer and people who are deteriorating rather than people who are growing and you're saving, that's a lot harder to sell to people, and that's a lot harder to encourage people to take part in. What this does is it provides that initial spirit of interest, awareness, volunteers, notable celebrities and philanthropists who can actually get in touch and actually provide that initial impetus to get the campaign moving. More to the point, it provides that initial financial kick that allows you to create sustainable results. Things like research isn't easy to get off the ground. It's not easy to start researching into a new disease or developing new drugs to do this. Pharmaceutical companies need a massive incentive to actually do it. This is what this provides. Now, by providing that, you also lay the groundwork for future results as the scientific research goes on and as you can report back what people are doing. So this is where you provide a sustainable solution to these by giving them that initial burst at the start. The second tier is on giving communities. They said that this is coercion, but we think that it's rather an environment of expectation where you are able to give something to anything. You can give money or you can give influence. And this helps in fighting apathy. A lot of people don't give because the problem is too big, the problem is too distant. Now individuals are able to see the impact of their actions and the collective impact on the action as it's spread all over Facebook. That gives them a reason to get involved. That gives them encouragement to stay involved. And that gives them encouragement to rope their friends into it. For those reasons, Mr. Speaker, these charities are sustainable. Go with viral marketing.
Thank the Speaker for his speech to conclude the case for the government bench and call the government with hearing.
We recognize and concede that viral campaigns result in awareness and result in interest. The problem with today's debate is that awareness and interest enough? Does it come at a cost that we cannot sustain? And that's going to be the main thing that I'm going to talk about before I focus on the idea of why this particular short-term burst in terms of viral campaigning is so particularly pernicious. The first issue is awareness and interest enough. What we've brought to you today, right, from our extension, is the idea that it creates complacency because it results in armchair critics. What the other side has said today, right, is basically that, these people are at least more interested now, and there's a greater chance that they're going to actually, interact with these charities. Here's the problem with that. These people did not access this information through brochures or through advertisements. They looked through it through social media. A media that has long been criticized for being one that people like and assume that that like seems to help something. Where people share information about Boko Haram and the girls being kidnapped and assume that that is something, that they're doing something for it because they have shared that information. That is a media by which loads of people think that they are doing something simply by sharing knowledge. That is precisely why these viral campaigns may gain awareness and interest. But it's going to stop there. It's going to stop with the liking and sharing. And even if people get that level of awareness, it doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to donate. But further to that, we say that even if they do donate, we think that there are actually harms there, which I'm going to talk about later. But what's more important to recognize is, first of all, it entrenches the idea that armchair critiques, that armchair activism is helpful, that sharing is caring, and more people would actually focus on campaigns. This interest, however, we think is not enough. That level of discourse that we're talking about is a very debate sphere thing, right? Who are the people who post about 10 reasons why I want to do it? By the way, it's debaters. One of my friends who was telling me about this was explaining how she's not a debater, her friend did this ice bucket challenge to say, her friend did ice bucket challenge and said, yeah, of course I'm going to do the challenge, I don't want to pay the $10. Because that's what they think, right? I'll do the challenge and I'll skip out the donation. They do the action and they think that they've spread awareness of the charity. And that's where your problem is. Because people think that merely sharing is a good way of replacing the money. Here's the further problem. People who do that are likely to be altruistic. So it means that instead of actually contributing $10 this year to some charity, I'll just dump a ice bucket on myself and say, look, I've done my good deed for the year. They seem to think that people have infinite amounts of money to give to charity. Well, maybe they do, but as long as I've done one good deed for the year, there's absolutely no reason to suggest why I should do another, and they've never been able to prove that. So we think that this awareness and interest is misplaced. This causes a debate sphere thing, and even ignoring personal example, right? Most celebrities, if you actually looked at it, right, just said, look, I did the ice bucket challenge and I nominated this person and this person. They never actually specified it. If you look at the origins of the challenge are do it or donate $10. These celebrities don't even offer that. So they're doing it literally to just spread awareness, not even to garner donations for that matter. So you don't actually think they're trying to ever help and all that. Mark's premise, right, and therefore moving on to Mark's specific nuance that viral campaigns can actually lead to sustainable campaigns in these situations, right? No, it doesn't. It doesn't lead to sustainable interest, because the interest that you gain from viral campaigns, because I only noticed it because it was trending on my newsfeed. What does that mean? I'm only going to continue noticing it. If it continues trending on my newsfeed, and if something else trends on my newsfeed, I'm going to look at that. What's the problem here? There's no way to sustain this short burst of interest besides thinking of creating campaigns. Well, that would do well for my friends in the advertising industry because we pay them and they'll think of creative campaigns for you. But we think that that's just the charity sending the money, not spending the money in the best way. So we think that even if there's a way for you to sustain interest, right, people who got to know about you through popular means are only going to continue caring about you if you're popular, not in terms of that. We think that our form is a lot better, right? You have long-term critics who are actually evaluating you properly. And we think that these are the critics that provide a much better check and balance. Because look, if they researched into you before donating to you, chances are they're going to continue looking at that. But if they donated to you merely because you were popular, there's actually no assurance that they actually looked into the background of your charity in the first place. So I think that, right, it's better to compete based on brochures and what charities actually do than to compete on popularity. Even if it costs more, at least when I donate to this charity, it's because I know what they're doing and I support what they're doing as opposed to they're popular. Mark.
Many people are apathetic towards giving to charities because they believe the problem is too big and they can't do anything. Even if it's imagined, this encourages people to get more involved in giving and get more involved in charity.
Right. You're talking about the minority of the people who actually move forward beyond activism. But let's talk about why this short-term burst is particularly bad. First of all, it creates a large sum of money that they have for this year, which charities are unaware about whether will continue to the next year. Look, we don't have a lot of experience with viral campaigning. Some of them may assume, like Mark, that if I can sustain their interest, they're going to continue. Therefore, they're going to over-invest. If I've got $1 million this year, and my charity, the way my charity works is that by the end of the year, the coffers must be empty, to provide some degree of transparency, so you're spending all your money. Or if you have X sum of money, you can't go for campaigns or donations or whatever, right? The point is, if you have a large sum of money, they will think, oh, if I have a large sum of money and I have 10 needy projects, why don't I go forward and donate to all these 10 needy projects and start 10 projects? Here's the problem. They're going to overstretch, especially the new charities that they talked about in opening. That's why we think there's a particular harm, right? You create a situation where charities think, I might get money next year, let me just put the money out there first. These charities are overstretched, you'll end up with too many projects that they can't actually sustain, which we think is far more harmful. Before 6 years.
That's an
argument for not giving charities money in the future. Why is it really different? Like, why is it any additional net harm from, you know, the possibility of giving money and encouraging them
No,
to
that's because the idea that you guys have brought up, right, is that they're going to get a large sum of money. That's precisely the problem, that they are not going to know whether it continues towards the next year. And if it doesn't, these charities would have already been overstretched. And that's the problem with your policy, as opposed to ours, where these people who have like researched into you and started to donate to you are likely to donate to you and are a reliable source of income, as opposed to yours, where they'll flip from side to side, as my previous speaker mentioned, which you guys haven't really dealt with, right? Why would people who got to know your charity through popular means stay with your charity? You haven't actually proved that. But here's the important part, right? We think that what they're actually doing, we disagree with their characterization that they're introducing new donors. If in fact, most of the time they're actually introducing people who are already contributing towards charity. So you're merely moving money away from one charity towards another, which we think is particularly harmful. But here's the worst part of it all. Not everyone can appeal via brochures, as they said in their extension. But that's the problem, right? Not everyone can appeal towards social media campaigning. Not every charity has the money to spend on the social media budget and can think of that. At least on our side, we are talking about real and actual projects, and we are happy to support people evaluating charities based on that. Thanks.
Take the speaker from the speech to sum up the case for the opposition bench and the debate as a whole. I call the opposition with chaotic.
Want what's best for charity and what's best for creating a more giving culture. What we brought to you, and specifically what we brought to you exclusively from side closing opposition, is we told you not just how we help these charities and culture in the short run, but how we ensure that the sustainability of this approach is created when you use these kind of viral campaigns to change the way in which people view charity and change the way in which they think they have the impact on charity as a whole. I'm going to do this debate on two questions. A, how do we help the specific charities that engage in these viral media campaigns, and are these viral social media campaigns really better for them? And then I'll move on to the second point of today, how we better create a culture that embraces this kind of charity that we're talking about in a more sustainable fashion. Now, on to the first idea, on the idea of charity. And let's just deal with everything that closing government has been trying to tell us today. Because the only real idea that came out from them was the idea that, look, people aren't actually donating to these charities, right? They're simply doing it for awareness, so you don't get any kind of short-term harms, and after the initial burst runs out, you lose that awareness as well, and it doesn't lead on to the future. No thank you, sir. But on this very idea, the idea that you have awareness in and of itself, we think, is something that is good. There's a positive benefit for that charity that didn't exist in the past. But what is specifically good for sustainability? Because we think that what is important for a charity, especially smaller charities, is to get, no thank you, sir, that word out in the first place. That you recognize that maybe out of 100,000 people that they hit, maybe only like 1,000 people will actually be genuinely interested in this charity. The difference here is this. When you get that word out to these people, no thank you, sir, it's not just that they will donate, it's that when they actually do have the interest and start looking up to them, that's when you get things like new volunteers, that's when you get things like new regular donors, for instance, that helps these charities become more sustainable in the long run. No thank you, madam. That's the specific difference that we are talking about. But secondly, they also ignored all of the analysis that came from Mark when he told you that, look, no thank you, sir, that the reason why awareness is so fundamentally important and why that short burst of the amount of money is so fundamentally important is because it gives certain types of charities that wouldn't otherwise flourish without these social media campaigns the ability and finances to start the groundwork towards greater research that we think is specifically important for that. So what was the analysis that he gave you here? We told you that, look, certain charities just don't have that capability to reach out to other people based on like the things that they are fighting for. So for instance, if you were like, fight for things like dementia, for instance, that aren't like as sexy a charity as like, say for example, helping poor children. What happens, no thank you, sir, is that it's very difficult for you to gain that kind of traction in normal campaign, normal life. So the reason why social media viral campaigns, especially like the Ice Bucket Challenge, is so fundamentally important is because it allows you to replace that, the sexiness of like whatever your charity needs to be with like something else that gains the awareness for people. And the initial cost, or like, no thank you madam, the initial amount of money that you get, even though it's maybe only for the short term, is important for you to be able to invest in things like scientific research, where you only need that money really once. Once you have that groundwork for the money you're talking about, then we think that you're able to progress from there and able to have like more sustainable growth in the future. No, thank you, sir. So the failure on the other side of the house is that they never quite came back. They assume that money will run out eventually, but they don't recognize, they never quite grapple with the fact that this money is able to create structures and create equipment and make investments that will last these charities far longer than they ever talked about. That is the idea of sustainability that the other side of the house never quite understood. And this is why we think even short bursts of money has massive long-term benefits to the people that we are talking about. Closing. If I look at it neutral, I'll think of what it is. But if I have to just pull an ice bucket over my head, I'll do that and think my party's done. Here's the difference, right? You can throw 100,000 brochures out into the world and probably no one will pick it up. But when 100,000 people see the ALS Ice Bucket Challenge and they see that it's standing for something, at least some of them will actually go forward and look to it. And the thing is that because it's the ALS Ice Bucket Challenge, you can send it out to millions and millions of people, not just the 100,000 brochures that you can only give to people who are around you. That reach and that awareness is what is necessary for you to be able to reach out to more people and make your charity more effective. And that is precisely why, right? Because we recognize that some people may do things like volunteerism, no thank you, sir, right? But what we need is for people, what we need is to reach out to more people to get the kind of finances that's necessary for us to create those structures that allow for more sustainable growth in these kind of charities. And that's why we think that's fundamentally important. So the idea of who is best for these charities that engage in the social media campaigns, we think it's us because we actually allow them the ability to get the kind of finances necessary for them to help these people in the long run, not just for the short run. No, thank you, Joshua. Now, moving on to the second idea, right? Who better helps people? Who better creates a culture in which we actually sustain the kind of help that goes towards charities and things like that. Let's do the analysis that came out from closing government, right? Because essentially, the characterization that they gave us was that, look, people simply become armchair donors, right? That they look at the Ice Bucket Challenge, they like it, etc. No, thank you, sir, and they think that their work is done. And if for example, people's charitable will is going towards fulfilling some sort of commit quota in a year. I like 100 pages, therefore I'm done. I don't have to donate any more money. We think that people's empathy goes a lot deeper than that, right? That when you start doing things you pique their interest in these kind of charity things, no thank you, sir, that they may not have considered before. That's when they start doing things engaging in understanding what their society needs. That's when they start doing things trying to find out about these kind of illnesses and all the other attendant illnesses, no thank you, sir, that these people become more and more interested in. That's the difference that we are talking about. But they also never dealt with the analysis, no thank you, Joshua, that came out from Mark when he told you that, look, the difference here is that we changed the culture and the mindset that people have. The reason why they are so empathetic to begin with is because people normally think that they can't do anything to help these charities. They don't believe that the donations that they make when they look at a brochure of $100 is going to be able to solve a massive problem, for example, hundreds of thousands of people dying in Africa or things like that. That's why they don't bother to help. That's why they don't bother to donate, because they don't think it can make a difference. At the point at which, however, you have a visceral campaign the ALS Ice Bucket Challenge, where they can actually see their friends and themselves doing it, and see all the kind of reports that show how far the small little movement that they are doing has moved towards. We think that this encourages people to become more giving. It encourages them to start engaging in things like charity, start engaging in the kind of action they're talking about. Because now they fundamentally change the way they look at charity to look as if every little amount of aid that you put towards that, every little amount of help or movement or action that you do is actually something that can substantively help this charity. Why is this so important? Because this means that these people are changed for life, right? And that is precisely the kind of culture that you want to bring to be able to help not just the charity in question, but all other charities for a longer period of time, towards a better